Hey everybody, it's me, Angela Walters. Welcome to this week's live chat. I'm super excited to spend some time talking about my favorite thing, quilting. Well, one of my favorite things, quilting, and answering your questions live. I have some announcements, I've got some show and tell, I've got some giveaways, we have a lot of fun stuff to talk about, so we're gonna get right to it. If you're watching live right now, Jessica is here as always, monitoring the live chat, kicking off the spammers, and taking your questions down. So you can leave them in the comments and I'll answer those at the end. And then also we're doing a giveaway just during the live. You have to leave a comment on there saying, hi, I'll show you what I'm giving away here in a second, but you can go ahead and get that taken care of right now if you want. First of all, we have some new swag on the website, some new shirts, got this 3/4 length basketball or baseball sleeve. I love that. And then we have a pink shirt and a hoodie. So we haven't really updated our shirts in quite a while. So you can check out the website if you need, some QIMT swag. You can get the link in the description box below when we're done. And then I've got to show you some giveaways, and then we're going to talk about tips for quilting star blocks. So kind of the help, how do I quilt it? Give me some design ideas. And even if you're like, well, I don't love anybody enough to make star blocks for them, there are tips that you can actually take and apply to other blocks as well. So let me pull up my pictures real quick and we'll get right to it. Before we talk about that though, I just want to remind you that June 8th is not anytime soon, but it will be here before we know it, and that's our annual quilt walk. And you're going to want to make sure you try to make it if you can, if you live in the Kansas City area, because none other than Jenny Doan will be our featured speaker. So I don't have all the details ironed out yet. I know she'll be here. Just keep that, save the date, keep that scheduled out there so you can come hang out with us. And we are only about 45 minutes from Missouri Star, so you could, two birds, one stone if you need to do that. And then also our block of the month, which only opens up once a year. Registration is now open, so if you want to check that out, I have a little QR code you can scan here. It's our exclusive block of the month. It's only here at Quilting Is My Therapy. Once it starts, you won't have to hear me talk about it unless you're in our Build a Quilt. But it's kind of fun because I design all the blocks and all the fabric, and we have 3 different colorways. So it's kind of a fun, create your own customizable thing. And you can just scan that QR code if you want some more details, if you'd like. Now, how about a giveaway, right? That's really what we're all here for, right? Well, hopefully not. Hopefully you're here to hear my witty instruction on quilting. But I have been trying to do some little giveaways, and I have some fun Gypsy products. They are a lighted seam ripper and a lighted needle threader. Now, you might think, Angela, surely you don't use a seam ripper, but I do, and I still rip out sometimes. Usually it's when I have placed the wrong design in the wrong area, which just happened not too long ago. It was on one of Tula's quilts, and I'm like, so I had to do a little unquilting. Funny little quilting joke. It's called frogging because you rip it. But it's also lit, so that's kind of nice. And then a needle threader. So one lucky viewer is going to get both of these. All you have to do is leave a comment. Say whatever. Say Angela's awesome. Say Jessica's awesome. She's the one picking the winner, so you might be a better chance if you're watching live. But if you don't win, no worries. We can give you 20% off just until next Thursday. So there's a link in the description box below. You can click on that and we'll take you to those. You can get 20% off with the promo code RIP. I thought that was pretty clever. Promo code RIP it. So anyway, pretty fun option there. And talking about needle threaders, when I was younger, people would always tell me, oh, wait till you get older. Well, I hit 40 and then I hit that. I can't thread those needles anymore without the threader. So what are you going to do? All right, now let's get on to the topic at hand. During the live chats, if you've not made one live or watched it afterwards, I always try to share something instructional or something helpful or pictures of something. And so this one is going to be, how do I quilt star blocks? What are tips and suggestions for picking out the designs? Because that is the one question, no matter where you are on your quilting journey, that you will have to confront from time to time. New quilters, experienced quilters, ones in the middle, we all struggle from time to time picking out that right design. So I kind of give myself a set of rules to follow that helps kind of make the decisions a little bit easier. Now, those rules are just, like I said, helpful, not meant to hard, fast, don't break them, but just give me things to think about. So when I'm sharing some of the tips, just know that these are my rules and what I find helpful. So before I even pick a design, I have to ask myself a couple questions first. How big is the block? I mean, it's just a known fact. The bigger the block, the more room I have for bigger, more ornate designs. The truth of the matter is there's quilting designs that work great in certain size blocks and that don't work in other ones. So for instance, smaller blocks, I can't do a feather. So that's really important. And then also, secondly, almost as important, but pretty close. What fabric combinations are used? Usually star blocks are a lot of different arrangements and configurations. What fabrics have been picked out, and then that kind of guides the designs I'm going to pick. And I'll show you some examples of all this here in a second. How complex is the block? Is it a little Ohio star? Is it a multi-pieced block? Because that's really going to change how I quilt it. And really the most important question to ask though is, how do you want to quilt it? Because there is no wrong way to quilt your quilt. So if you're like, dang it, I just want to do this design, just do it, right? You've already got it selected, so that's perfect. So when we're talking about things to consider, first of all, larger blocks are going to be their own struggle. Now this quilt is the Ohio Supernova quilt by Heather Jones. This is a huge star block. This is pretty extreme, but I was like, I got to find the biggest star block I have. But in those big blocks, we're really just treating them like any other area. And if you're working on quilts with big blocks and you can't really manage it in the quilt or the machine that you're working with, echoing is going to be very helpful. So you can see on this block, if you kind of see in the teal blocks, there's some echoing and then some geometric quilting. So those bigger blocks can sometimes be tricky to manage, using echoing to shrink them down and make them a little bit easier. Sometimes they're, big and small, or, maybe not as huge as the whole quilt, but these are fairly large stars. This is the Midnight Stars quilt from the Midnight Quilter. Those are big blocks, not quite big enough, as it turns out, for a full feather, but I could do a partial feather in them. So the more you work with designs and the more you work with the quilts, the more you're going to know, oh, a feather works great in this size for me, or a half feather works great in this size. So really, the bigger the blocks, not trickier to quilt, it's just more to think about, more room to say. So some good examples of some big ones. But sometimes we have teeny tiny star blocks. This is just a little detail from a quilt by Tula Pink. Those little red and pink striped stars were only like this big. There's not a whole lot of room to do much there. It's always tricky for me though when it's not tiny but not big, right? I have to quilt something in it, but nothing too ornate. So that's usually my trouble spot. Everybody has their own struggles there, but really, again, the size plays a big role. But also fabric placement, right? So the fabric that's been picked out, for instance, in this picture, it was obviously fussy cut to have that cute little scissors in the center. And so knowing that, I'm going to quilt that a little bit different than I will other blocks. So is the fabric placement such that the star has points around in a different center, as we can see here? Is it the fabric in the center, the most important part? So this is a quilt that I quilted for Tula Pink, I think in 2018. I mean, it's a huge star, but the fabric placement is such that the fabric is the most important thing. So going around the details of that print and using the quilting to draw that out. So really have to keep not an eye on that, but one other thing to consider is the fabric placement. And then fabric placement is also multiple pieces. Like this particular picture I know is not the best. Some of these are older quilts that I quilted and, camera quality wasn't there. But the white and the prints, am I treating each print different, or am I treating the prints as one and the background as one? Just kind of getting that all figured out in my mind and then picking the design that I want. So there are some things I take into account. And then the prints themselves, is there contrast? So for instance, the top picture, these quilts were both pieced by Camille Ross Kelly, by the way, at Thimble Blossoms. The top one, the fabrics were a little bit different, but not too incredibly different. So I did plume feather in one and a feather in the other. Similar designs, but a little different. Whereas the one on the bottom, there's a lot of contrast between those prints. I have, the white background that forms part of the star, and then those prints. So when I have definite contrast like that, and contrast is just a fancy word for different, when they're that different, then I just pick opposite type designs to do. So in the print, I said, ooh, I'll do serpentine lines. And then in the white, I'll do dot to dot. So sometimes picking opposite designs help them stand out from each other and also keeps it interesting as I'm quilting. Fabric placement, we already said, is it different colored points? Are we talking about a focal featured center? And then also, if it's made with busier prints, can I even see the quilting in it anyway? So this particular block is actually from a prior year's Build a Quilt block of the month. And this was from the Stay Wild fabric collection, which I designed. Well, those prints are very busy, especially that one in the center. You can't really see the quilting there anyway. So I'm going to do something easy for me, some swirls, and then save the other quilting or the contrasting quilting for where you can actually see it. So some echo lines in those star points. Again, This is just the rules that I follow, the rules I've given myself. You're going to, play around with that and find what works for you. It's just nice to give myself a direction to head. So if it does have that focal print in the center, the star, those points are acting kind of as a way to frame that main idea, then I'm not going to quilt the points in the center the same, right? I mean, obviously there's different fabrics, and I really want that holiday homies guide to stand out. So when I'm dealing with something like this, I put, the interesting quilting in the center, go around some of those elements, and then in the points, maybe just do some echoing, and we can see those echo lines here a little bit. So again, fabric placement, very important. Now, it's up to you, right? What do you like about the block, and what is your favorite thing, and how do you want to show it off? These are just quilts I've worked on over the years. And then, we're talking about complex blocks. Does it have a lot of pieces? These particular blocks are really a struggle for me to quilt comparatively because we have so many different things going on. And so in that point, I'm just looking at the individual shapes, the diamonds that make up the block, and kind of picturing how that's going to look when it's continued in the round. So when you're looking at the design, you can't just look at this one block, because when you put it next to itself or repeat it, sometimes you get some really cool secondary patterns. So keeping that in mind, especially with those more ornate, more pieced blocks. I mean, here's an extreme example. One of those type of quilts I would love to be able to piece, but I probably would get bored about a quarter of the way through it. So, but you can see all the individual shapes that make it up. So if I'm working with something like that, a bigger block, really lots of little pieces, I'll just kind of look at the individual shapes and start pulling it together. Okay, once I've figured out all of that, then it's time to pick the designs. Now, it's so hard to take 30 minutes and tell you, oh, here's all the great designs to use in stars. This is just a couple, right, that you can use. But try to find those designs that you can use in a lot of different ways, in a lot of differently shaped blocks. Really going to help make the quilting process a little bit easier. And the number one easiest design for stars, or really blocks of basic shapes like this, is continuous curve. Now, continuous curve is just a line that curves from point to point to create the shape that you can see here. And this is continuous curve in its most basic sense, right? What I love about continuous curve is that it really draws attention to the center of the block, or where you put those lines, and it uses the piecing as a guide. So it really does highlight the beautiful piecing there. As a different note, it also starts and ends at the same point. So if I wanted to start the design at a corner or at a point of the star, that's where I'll return. So it's a really nice way to allow me to quilt that star and then move on to continue quilting through the quilt. Now, one thing I will say about this design, and when I'm picking out designs, I want to be really aware, where is the attention going to go, right? The attention the block is going to draw. So this particular design is really going to draw your eye to the center of that block. So I'm going to do this design in a block that's pieced well. If I had really bulky seams, that was a question that came up on the type chat before we started. How do you handle bulky seams? Well, I avoid them. If the center of this star was pieced and very, very bulky and I couldn't quilt it, this is not the design I would do in that area. It's hard to know, right? How do you know what you like? Well, do it once or twice and then you realize, well, no, I know not to do that next time. So you might be thinking, oh, I'm just trying to breathe and quilt at the same time. I can't overthink this. Well, just forget I said that. But just know that this design is going to draw attention to the center of your block. And you can make it as ornate as you want. So this particular block just has more curved lines. It's going to be more densely quilted. It's going to have more lines coming into the center. It's really going to draw attention to that center block. And so it's a great option for those types of blocks. Continuous curve. I always say if you can only learn two things, continuous curve and a swirl design, you can quilt any quilt with that. And there's just some good examples of that. This particular block is in the center star, just continuous curve with another little echo on the inside. Again, just a slight variation. And the more you work with them, the more variations you can see, or of course you can get lost down a rabbit hole of internet searching, but it's a really fun way to quilt blocks of all different sizes. It also combines well with other blocks. So in this example, we have some green and yellow diamonds that make up the star. And in one color, I did continuous curve, and then in the green, I did dot-to-dot quilting, which we'll see here in a second. But it looks nice with other blocks as well. So you don't have to do it in every piece. You can pick and choose where you want to put that in. Again, really, really fun design. And then in this star block, which is actually from the original OG Build-A-Quilt that kicked it all off, You can see continuous curve in those points around the outside. So again, great design, great versatile design. If you've ever tried it and you've struggled with it, the one tip I'll give you real quick is don't look at your needle. Look ahead in the direction you're heading. I don't care where that curve goes, but I do want it to try to end on that point. So I always put my eye on the point and then trust my hand to bring me there. And know that there's a lot of curves going to different points. When you step back, it's going to look nice. So try not to worry too much if it doesn't go exactly where it needs to go. Now let's revisit that fussy cut block I showed earlier. We can see that continuous curve design in the center. Allows me to quilt that center square without taking away from that beautiful little scissor detail. And then I could use variations of that continuous curve around the outside of the block. So again, really nice because you can just use those reference points, quilt those nice curved lines, and have fun with it. More examples of the continuous curve. So this particular quilt was from the Midnight Quilt Show. It's the Thistle quilt. And in those star blocks, I know it's hard to see, but there's some continuous curve in there. But in the outer parts, those partial stars works there as well. So when you're looking at your blocks, they're not always going to be perfect stars. Maybe they're partial, or maybe it's just like a diamond shape. But that continuous curve is a great option for that. If that's number one, then I would say a very, very, very close second would be dot-to-dot quilting. So dot-to-dot quilting is the same basic idea of continuous curve, except I'm using straight lines instead of curved ones and making some different shapes. I love dot-to-dot quilting and continuous curve together because they're so different in shape. One's curvy, one's pointy. They just add a nice contrast. But much like continuous curve, I can quilt it so that it starts and ends in the same point. Again, helping me get through those star blocks and move on. There's nothing wrong with starting a new line of quilting for each block. I just don't want to do that. So I like to find those designs that work in a lot of different ways. But like continuous curve, there's so many different variations of the dot to dot, that kind of geometric shape. In the star point or star blocks are great because we have lots of points, lots of corners to touch or shapes to create. And so this particular one, it was pieced by Tulip Pink. It's all the same fabric. Even though it's, not pieced with diamonds, I just decided to quilt it with that dot to dot just to draw attention to the center of it. So it's kind of important to take all that stuff into consideration. A couple more dot to dot examples. Again, just like continuous curve, it's going to have a lot of lines in the center. It's really going to draw your eye to the center of the block if that's where all the lines go. So just be really aware that it's in a block that you like, or that it's, that's where you want people to look. Sometimes I'll put a really ornate design in a block because I'm trying to distract from another block I didn't quilt so well somewhere else. Sometimes I'm doing it to highlight the block. So in the purple example, that is from our Help How Do I Quilt It Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along. I did a whole video series on design ideas, and 1 week was just on star blocks. So you can check that out on my YouTube channel if you want to watch that, and it will show you some more ideas. But again, so some just other examples of that dot-to-dot geometric kind of quilting. Great for sampler quilts or when you have blocks of a lot of different sizes or different shapes. So this particular quilt is actually a panel. Don't be super impressed with my piecing skills because it's just a quilt panel. But you can see those different geometric dot-to-dots in their different orientations depending on the block. So again, really versatile way to quilt those stars. I really like it too because if you think about stars, they're very pointy, very angular in general. And then I can do something curvy and soft around the stars, again, to have a little bit of that contrast. So kind of a fun option there. I also like to, I know I said I like to combine the continuous curve and the dot-to-dot together, or even alternating between blocks. So this particular quilt, I know it's hard to see the quilting in the blocks because that fabric is so beautiful, but I just did, one block in dot-to-dot, one block in continuous curve, and just kind of alternated throughout. So again, they look nice together, they play well together, they fit a lot of different shapes, so it's pretty nice. But this is actually the same quilt pattern, just like quilted slightly different. So let me go back. This is that other one. I did a double take when I was pulling the pictures together. I'm like, these are different quilts, right? Yes, they are. Sometimes though, you maybe want to branch off of the continuous curve or the dot to dot. You want to do something a little bit different. And so some other options for you, or some ones I've used in the past, are curvy options, like feathers or this faux kind of rope that's in my very first book. Diamond blocks tend to make up star shapes. Star blocks are made up from diamond shapes sometimes. And so knowing those designs that fit well in diamond shapes, like this faux rope, is a great option. And so we can kind of see a little bit closer detail up to the right. So sometimes you want curvy. That's great. I know that I hear people sometimes say, oh, if it's very pointy quilt block, I should do something curvy. Or somebody else will say, if it's a very pointy quilt block, I should do something pointy. Sure, do whatever you want. Either one will look great. And so this just gives me a curvier kind of option. Now from that help, how do I quilt it? I just kind of grabbed some pictures of those star blocks. You can do more than one design, do 2 or do 3. We can see some different variations here. Sometimes I let the fabric dictate that. If I have a block with 3 different fabrics, I might do 3 different designs. Sometimes I just alternate between 2 because I get easily bored. Or I could just do the same design over the whole block. It's really, just like every other part of quilting, it's very much up to you and your preferences. But I know sometimes seeing actually quilted blocks really helps kind of come up with those ideas. So a little bit of geometric with the curvy look. And then there's those echoed points. Really easy. If I'm not sure what to do, I just start adding some echoing inside the points of the star until an idea comes. And then sometimes you can tell if those star points just have echoing, it's just because I could never come up with anything else to do in them. And one last little picture, and then I'll answer your questions live and we'll announce the winner. So when you're working on your star blocks, just know that's such a general category. There's a lot of different shapes, sizes, a lot of different things to go into it. But I think you have fun with it, you find those designs that look good, and every time you get done with a quilt, you learn what you do or don't like, right? Sometimes you're like, I've learned what not to do next time, and sometimes that's, like I said, very, very important. So one question that came up on the type chat before I answer the questions here, I get on the live chat about half an hour before and type and we chat. Somebody said, would I suggest that the purists give up cotton thread and switch over to glide? We know that I love all kinds of thread, and I love poly and cotton. I would never suggest switching threads if what you have works and you like it. Like it's kind of like the grass is not always greener, right? If it's not broke, don't fix it. But if you want a cheaper option or you don't like the lint that can come from cotton, that could be an option. But it's just a personal preference. So don't feel like you have to change it just because that's what I say. I'm only the expert of my opinion, right? So I'm ready for those questions whenever she's over there writing as fast as she can. Give her a little ice and ice your hand after you're done. Now, next week's live chat, there is a 50% chance I will be ready to announce the next Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along. If it's not ready, it will be the next week. So we're just pulling together the final details and it's just hopefully so. All right, when choosing designs for a star block, do I recommend breaking up some of the points to soften them up? Absolutely. If you want a little bit of a curvier look to the quilting, definitely. And to kind of piggyback on that, the question, like, how do I handle bulky seams? I'm going to pick designs that aren't going to go to those seams. So when I'm changing up designs, sometimes softening them up means I'm avoiding those bulky seams. But yeah, I think it's great. Have I ever had a quilting slump? How did I get out of it? Yes, I'm usually good for about 1 a year, a mini one. Jessica's like, yeah, that's usually when she's crying in her office. No, I'm just kidding. When I'm feeling burnt out, and it's funny, I've thought about doing a live chat on this, so I might just have to do it. But it's a phase, right? And life is just busy, and sometimes life is busy, and you just have to give yourself the grace to know that you'll get back to that when you have time. I think most of it is the freaking out about the slump. Like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to get it back. Well, you will. Whatever's going on, and it's just handle whatever you need to handle, and then it's there when you get there. I know that's not a great option. It just sucks. Just know that you can get through it. I just have to get through it. I will say if we need a practical takeaway, I start cleaning my quilting room. That usually helps me get inspired by some project I have laying around, or if nothing else, it'll just feel better to have the room cleaned. How would I approach an irregular design, like an irregular block maybe? Especially like improvisationally pieced star quilts. Oh my gosh, when that was a big thing, when the modern piecing started, the improv stars were such a pain because some of the points would be small and some are big. Like, oh my gosh. How do I approach it? Gosh, lots of echoing. Lots of echoing to help take the size and kind of shrink it down, make it even. So if I have a really big part and a really small part, it just kind of helps make it where I want it to go. But never underestimate the benefit of just a swirl all over design. Sometimes there's those blocks you want to do something difficult or something ornate in, and sometimes you just want to do an all over design. That's totally fine too. Do I use the same thread color for the star and the surrounding fabric? It depends on the fabric. So if somebody has, like, I've gotten a quilt before with like black solid background and bright yellow blocks, I'm probably going to change thread colors because I can't find one that's going to look good over both. But it's totally personal preference. I probably would though. How do I handle quilting over large, dense foundation paper pieced blocks? Very, very carefully. It depends on how the pattern is written. Judy Niemeyer writes amazing foundation paper piece patterns because all the points don't come together. But when you have those bulky seams, you really got to be careful. A hammer helps. I'm not even joking. To like smack those seams down. A foot on your sewing machine that's like this, it's a dynamic foot. It's going to give you a hopping motion that will help you kind of hop over those. It's not fun, but yeah, you can get over them. With BAQ or Build a Quilt, are there classes or just block construction? So we send out the block kit that has the fabric that I designed and then the pattern, and then we have the Facebook group. So we don't have the class, but we have the monthly meetings where Joni shows the next block and gives piecing tips and answers questions, and then we have the Facebook group as well. So there are some resources, and if you're new to piecing and you're scared, definitely do it, because Joni is a retired home ec teacher and she has a heart for teaching people how to piece the way I like to teach people how to quilt. So you should totally do it. Okay, I'm quilting a sampler quilt, but I have a couple spots where the fabric is rumpled. Is it best to avoid quilting that section, or do I have a recommendation? Like rumpled because there's too much fullness, I would go ahead and quilt it down just however you would have planned on it. You might get some tucks where the fabric folds over on itself, but I promise once you wash it, it's going to look fine. If that makes you nervous, you could try, starching it and, getting it to smash down a little bit. Or you can leave it unquilted too. Either one's fine. I would still quilt it and just work it into submission. Is there a museum where you can come see all your quilts? That would be so fun. There are quilts everywhere. There's quilts behind me. They're in cabinets. They are in rooms. They're at my house. They're at the shop. And we're, fun fact, getting ready to do a new website. And so they wanted to take some pictures, the website developers. And they're like, well, we're going to need a few quilts. I'm like, okay. We have a few quilts. So there is no museum, but it would be fun to have some kind of exhibit or something. Although I do have a lot of my quilts at Quilt Walk throughout, so that's kind of fun too. Have you done a how-to on log cabin or house step blocks? No, but I think that would be the next one because that is another one that can be tricky with fabric placement. And how about a giveaway winner? So if you're not watching live, I'm so sorry. If you're not watching live, watch next Thursday at 3 p.m. Central for the giveaway. And if you're not watching live, you can use the promo code RIP and get both of them for 20% off. But Susan of Vardaman is not going to have to do that because she won them. So Susan, just leave a comment or contact us on the website and we will send those out to you and you can have those. Well, thank you so much for joining me for another weekly live chat. I'll be back next week, Thursday at 3 p.m. Central. Fingers crossed with a challenge announcement. If not, then I'll just do the walk of shame and do it the Thursday after. I hope everybody has a great weekend. Stay safe, everybody. And until then,